Farmer Tom here. Welcome to the Farmer Tomcast. Today on our ongoing series, Heroes of the Green, we've got Big Jim Davis. How's it going, Jim?
Good, man. How you doing?
Good, buddy. Good. Gonna hand you the mic
Oh,
and let you tell the world your weed trip, your weed story.
man. Thanks for having me on, man. I always love talking with you. You know that. God, I was thinking about it when you talked to me about it, like the whole weed trip. And it's funny, the other day I was telling a story to a friend about when I was probably 8 or 9, maybe 10. And we lived in a neighborhood where there was two cul-de-sacs that mirrored each other. There's a little hill, and the people up on the hill, my parents always complained about. They're always like, they're getting rich selling grass. They're getting rich selling drugs. Like they're getting rich, selling this pot. I've listened, and then finally, when I saw like this neighbor, he drove up in a fancy car. I was like, God, I want a piece of that. Like, what I mean? Like any kid would. And so I went and got lawn clippings and a box of sandwich bags because that's what I saw him have when he got out of the car. I put lawn clippings in these bags, loaded them up in my little red wagon, and I went around our cul-de-sacs yelling, "Grass for sale, nickel a bag." Well, I got about halfway through the cul-de-sac, and my mom just tackles me like a linebacker, man. I'm in the yard. I'm getting spanked. I'm getting yelled at, chased into the house. But that was probably my start into sales. Like that was my earliest, just out there selling lawn clippings. But then you like fast forward. Like I was raised in a conservative, like Christian home, and like it's not something you did. The people around me really didn't do it. And it wasn't until I was like 16 in high school. I'm in my best friend's garage, their shop, and we're working on his brother's Mustang, like 68 Mustang, 69. Anyway, he comes in with a Coca-Cola pop can, made into a pipe, puts a bud on top of it, and says, "Here you go." Like to both of us, like this is weed, like this is bud. It was like, and I remember thinking back, like that's so Americana. You know what I mean? Just the whole like your first experience being in the shop with your best friend's older brother, supplying all that stuff. But I knew then, like I knew, like I had already drank and already been around partying, but I was like, wow, this is different. Like this is something. There's something about it that like into my brain, even in the days after, where I was like, huh. And I kept thinking about it. Started smoking it, and then barely got through high school. Like had a few run-ins with it. Never any trouble though. It's always kind of easy to hide. But like college, college, I started using a lot more. I think like the stress level, like at 18, I was going to the coast to fish. Steelhead were running down by Geek Mike down in Otis. I didn't know him then. So I was headed down there with my best friend, same guy. And we got hit by a semi truck with three trailers, and my little Honda Accord went under all three trailers and like smashed my back up pretty good. And I didn't realize it then, but I started smoking weed. I didn't know it was medicine. You know what I mean? Because like you'd be lucky to like even read a magazine back then about weed or So the idea that it was medicine, like it was just didn't pop in my head. I just knew I felt better, and I knew I felt better than I did when I smoked weed or I drank. So I was like, I'm kind of into this weed thing. So college, I don't know. I got this part time job at a pizza place, and I hooked up with these guys. And before I knew it, like we were selling weed out of the pizza shop. Like people would call up, our customers would call up. We cut the delivery drivers in on it, just running our game. And started living like a kind of a really crazy disposable life back then. Like, because it was, you couldn't, you're 18, 19, you're making good money, like really good money, and you can't really use it. People ask questions, so you just party and just kind of let into that whole lifestyle. Everything's disposable, and it's like an ATM. You just buy more tomorrow. You just go get more money tomorrow. Which isn't the best life for an addict, right? Like, come home every morning broke. But like, I don't know, that kind of continued on, and then somewhere in there. So I was always, I've been an artist forever, and a drummer, and so about that time I was in bands on the side, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger until I was like, I got this one band that eventually got a record contract during grunge, and it was weird because as soon I started picking up on like, 'cause there was no internet. So it was like, I started picking up on like, oh, what addiction was and what alcoholism and all these other addictions really were and what they really meant. And about that time though, like my band just imploded. Like, now that I'm older, I can look back and realize like, oh, that was four young guys with horrible pain and horrible addiction that were just trying to mask and get through the day and get somewhere. But it devastated me. That breakup, like, just totally devastated me. And I over medicated for years and got really bitter and quit music. Left that whole scene. Went back to art and ended up starting uh, back up in airbrushing. And eventually, you know how it is. You work hard, you hustle, and so like I would work a day job, and then I'd have this night job doing art, selling stuff, and then eventually I worked enough where I was able to get my own shop going. So I would work during the day for another custom painter that was my mentor, and then at night I would go home and work on my stuff, and then eventually I was too busy to work for him. And but in that phase of making Harleys and hot rods, I got into the underground. You know what I mean? A lot of the customers that have the kind of money that can afford what we did just lived an unlawful life. And I ended up becoming really good friends with a lot of those people in that underground world. And eventually, some of my biker friends came along and said, "Hey, I see you're struggling because even though it's weird because people will walk up to your shop and see expensive bikes and cars and parts and paint, and they think that you're loaded." And it's like, oh man, no, if we sat down with paper, you'd see there's no margins. Like no custom shop in the world makes money. There's something else going on, you know? And so they came up and they're like, "Hey, have you ever thought about growing weeds?" And I'm like, "Well, I thought it was hard, like, I don't know." And so like, before I knew it, like they got me lights and taught me their system. And it was crude, man. It was so crude. I remember now looking back, the first grow was Northern Lights. Like stuff barely had a name like that. You know what I mean? Like it was just starting to get like names. And so they're like, "This is Northern Lights. It'll do you right. It's easy to grow. Here, grow them in these 5-gallon buckets with uh, like black gold, that mushroom compost soil, and here's your miracle grow, right? Like here's your box. You got a flower and a veg, and I followed the little system, and you're scared to death because you're like, it was so illegal back then, right? Do you remember? And then about then, God, that had to be like, I want to say like 96. And then in through that, I got a lot of trauma, so times are like a weird thing for me, like timelines. And in through there, I remember getting on overgrow.com. You remember that whole phase? Like, and Ken Westfall on there. And it's so weird to know some of these people now later in life. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so weird to sit down. Like, it'll even still happen. We'll be at an event. I'll be like, "Holy shit, you're so and so from Overgrow." Like, I remember you, you know. But I remember the thinking, like, this is just a big trap. Like, I don't know how computer science works. And I think they're just watching us. And so I was always scared to really even comment. And then I remember the day I came in and it said that the site had been taken down. And I remember that era of panic, and I just went back into the dark. And that whole thing and some other things in my personal life made me so scared. Because I'm trying to remember, like back then, it was like anything over 100 plants was like a guaranteed life sentence. Remember, they'd always threaten you with that. They'd always be like, 99 plants is life. And I'm thinking, like, fuck, like I prepped up to, I'm close to double life. Like, we got to really start thinking about this, stop talking to people. And just always scared, like the days of paying people to be like, "Can I borrow your van? I got to go to the grocery store," and like, and knowing that it's a game and knowing that it's just dumb. Um, but like through that period, I don't know, I learned a lot, even though I wasn't like great at it. I learned a lot. And like, even though we didn't have the killer newts and we didn't know a lot, the gardening part of it, the actual getting in there and doing stuff, was so cool to like have mentors and have people, because I'd bop over to other people's grow to learn and make money, and like, just teach me, let me walk in behind you and de-leaf and tell me why, tell me how to do this. And because I look at now, so the other day we were out in the greenhouse teaching somebody a technique, and it made me think back to when I remember this biker comes in. He's like, "I heard about this new technique. where you can get multiple tops. It's called Fuck I Missed. Femming, remember that? And he would try to show me, and like I remember like trying to get my eye in there and be like, oh, like, how's he doing? Like, how's this? And you come back and your plant's like it takes somewhere and it wouldn't. And I don't know. I remember back then there was just nowhere to go to learn that. You were lucky if you learned it. You were lucky if you got exposed to it. It was just, and you only learn that by exposing yourself, which is counterintuitive in weed being so closed off. So it was a real touchy. I don't know how we made it. I really don't know how we made it as far as we've had, especially when like rec hit and you just saw how good the other guys were. You're like, Jesus, where'd you learn that? Who taught you that? Because that learning curve walking into rec was steep, and medical. And even when medical came out up here, I remember for a few years thinking, like, you guys are idiots. They're just going to come in and take your shit, man. I went through a Rico at age 20 and watched that whole circle of friends just like what that did. And I'm like, I don't think you guys, telling friends, like, I don't think you realize how deep Ricos can go and how much latitude they have. And so this is just a giant Rico case to me. Like, it took a while. It took a while, but I started going to events. I remember going to an event and like it was everybody had card tables. They were selling their edibles, and it was a sketchy building. It was like a pop up. Like, we're only going to be here for a few hours, and that's where I met LB and Hovering from LB's Edibles was at one of those events. I started meeting like real people because always before it was like the Craigslist parking lot. All stars. You'd meet some dude, you try to get clones in the middle of the parking lot. You might get robbed, you might not. You don't know. And you hope that they had what they said. You didn't know, and it's probably covered in bugs. And God, now to see what it's become is crazy. Like, it's just crazy. Because you remember Coleman's Craigslist being like, oh, this guy's got Kush. Like, maybe I should hit him up. Maybe this could be the one. I think I got asked to that way when it first hit, and just thinking like, oh my God, this is amazing. There's different flavors now. And then now you go online and you just look and you're just like go on Seed Finder and just comb through that genealogical list. You're just like, oh my God. Like, I remember when these strains came online and now they're so deeply folded into this new, cookie strain. It's just crazy. I don't know. Sometimes you get frustrated, like we were talking about before the show. Sometimes you get frustrated. I think it is a little bit of burnout, especially when you're getting older, because you've kind of seen everything. But like right now, I feel like it's twofold. Because I feel like genetics are at a bottleneck, but I also feel like we're into a whole new territory that like the 24-year-old me could have dreamt of. With I think belts. The new belt strain, rainbow belts. That's what set that off today because I was just like, it just sounds like some polyhybrid bullshit, and just digging through the lineage and just being like, well, God, how's there any room for anything in here? There's so many different crosses and realizing kind of where we've come from. Yeah, it's weird. I'm trying to think. And then so when I had my paint shop, I ended up getting involved in some really big projects, started getting traction. And at one point was talking to Discovery Channel because they had just started these new reality shows where they were going out to little places and filming. And like, so that was all the big buzz. And I had a chance to move down to California to some places. And so I just kept pushing harder. And so I'm growing dope. I got to tell you about this house we had. 2-story on the side of the mountain. Half the bottom floor is pretty much all underground. And the dude that built the house put in a pistol range inside that went into the side of the hill, like with tunnel, And like while we're renting the place, I'm just like, oh my God, like I want this for the gun range. And then so we rent it. But then when that guy was saying, you gotta grow, I went downstairs. I'm like, this is perfect. It's got ventilation built in for the smoke. It's got, you can't see it because it's in the side of the mountain. Like that's where I grew, and it went under my shop. And so people would be upstairs. I remember they would try to trade me. They'd bring just wretched, just shag weed. And they would be like, hey, how about I trade you 3 or 4 pounds and a couple grams for this paint job? And they don't realize they're standing over like 100 plants flowering underneath them. And you can't tell them, And it's like, I'm good, bro. I'm good. I like cash. And you know, and so that phase, I'm just pushing hard. And I ended up making a mistake one night. And I was working with a kid, like an apprentice, and we were welding. And I didn't see the can of acetone that was open underneath the car, and it caught fire. Like it blew up. It blew us flat, right? It burnt my legs, and so I ended up with burns and some other health problems from it. And that was like my downward spiral from that career. Like it got bad. Like I couldn't work like I used to, and I had to take a huge break. And I ended up having to close, but like in that kind of slow descent was when I got hooked on opiates. Like that's when that was introduced into my life, you know, morphine, oxy. And so you fast forward 8 years, and and I'm still smoking weed. Like I'm still finding a relief. Like the pain that I'm having from the burns, the pain I'm having from the bones is so bad that I just wasn't cutting it. And I ended up losing like almost a decade to opiates. You know, just full on like opiate addiction. Um, and then, but again, I knew that cannabis was part of the. I knew it was helping me, but we just didn't have any science, and I couldn't tell people when I would talk to them, like, because you look like an addict when you're trying to talk about weed when you're on other stuff. You know what I mean? Like you just look crazy, and it's just yeah. But I would try to tell people like, "Oh, it's expensive," and then got back into medical. Uh, had a group. You remember that era when people would stack cards? You know, you start going through that whole phase where you know, and God, I was talking about this the other day. It reminds me, rec kind of reminds me right now, recreational kind of reminds me of that point I hit in medical days. So the crew I joined, you know, we would go in and they would rent a house. And the idea is that you would find a family that maybe had a kid that had health issues, needed cannabis, and you would teach them how to grow. They could make a little income and live rent free, and everybody wins, was the idea. That was the spirit of what my group all agreed on. And about halfway through it, it became greed. It became where I would find out, like, oh, you're treating these people really bad. This isn't what you know I signed on for. And I eventually split off, started my own thing because at the end of the day, it's just like greed. Like right, every time you deal with greed on any level, it's like when's enough's enough, bro. Like you got paid. Why do you know? And so I just kind of worked myself away from other people and went back to being by myself. And I feel like I don't know. I just felt like people around me did better when I was doing it.